Welcome. This is Jim Tolles. We're just getting started here a couple of moments early. Make sure all the technology is playing nice. Give everyone a chance to settle in, let go of their days, check in with their breathing, and start to relax. As always, I like to guide you through kind of some mini reminders here around relaxing into yourself, because as we relax, we open up. It's easier to hear the truth that anyone has to share, including myself. And it's easier to hear your own truth. So if you've just signed on, take a few deep breaths. Give yourself a chance to slow down. Relax into your body. Let go of your day. Or start off your morning right, depending on where you are, if you happen to be over in Australia or New Zealand or that area. Technology is truly amazing, so I know I could be talking to you in just about any time zone. I could be in Hawaii, and I could be talking to you in your late afternoon. So here in the Pacific time, in northern Nevada, we are working our way into our evenings. If someone could just put a little comment quickly in the chat pod to let me know that you can hear me, that would be fantastic. In general, if at any point you can't hear me, please someone tell me, because I really don't know. I just get to listen to my own voice for about an hour. In general, if you're new, you have to be logged in to YouTube to be able to post a comment or a question. I generally ask that you post all questions and comments towards me and keep down the cross chatter, because otherwise if people are talking back and forth to each other, then some people's questions will get missed, and I want to be sure that I can at least see all the questions. Thanks, John. As many of you know, I speak intuitively, so sometimes I will address a question, sometimes I won't. Sometimes I will take a question in a completely different direction. And it's not because I don't appreciate the question. It's just part of me being in my own intuitive space, and this is part of what I talk about and teach all the time, is that in your own intuitive space, there's certain things that it's natural to say and other things that you don't. A lot of times there's some questions that people will pose to me that they still need to figure out for themselves, or maybe I'm not the right person to offer the answer, or maybe I don't have an answer. If it feels like I don't have an answer and I need to say something, I will. Like, I don't have any problem with saying I don't know. There's plenty of things I don't know. I'm just learning in this amazing world that is life as it evolves for me. But I think one of the interesting points we can make as we're sitting here and giving people time to log on, it's the difference between wisdom and what I call data. And data or information is stuff like how neurobiology works, right? So that's data. It's information that we can gather empirically, and we don't inherently know or have. However, we do inherently have wisdom. Like all of you have wisdom. You all have the same amount of wisdom that I have. And so that's always with us. And part of the relaxing in that I talk about in the first couple moments of joining together is just an encouragement to move towards your own wisdom. And I'm just going to be a mirror for that part. I may have other interesting data points about sexuality and the spiritual path today, but your own wisdom and your own sexuality is already part of you. Nobody adds that to you. So take a few more deep breaths and just let yourself settle, let the shoulders drop, let the jaw loosen. Those are some areas where we like to hold on to tension. Just giving yourself permission to really relax, allow yourself to open and to feel whatever is going on for you today. It doesn't matter what it is, it's just your experience, and I encourage you to just allow it. A big piece of the work I often do with people is helping them to just really allow their own emotions, their own issues. And when somebody relaxes and allows, it's kind of like carbonated water bubbling up. And it's not necessarily comfortable, but as we move through it and we let those bubbles burst to move on, we feel a lot better. And those issues passed and we can complete with them. So it's not really anything mystical. It's Very, very simple, and you'll have access to being able to do that for yourselves as well. It's just one of those things that I help guide people on. One last thing before we get going. I want to thank all my donors who are watching tonight, because you are the reason I'm here and I get to do free stuff like this. And I do a lot of free things, actually, replying to emails and comments and posting stuff and writing blogs and doing other videos, as well as doing these live streaming talks. So thank you. If anyone feels moved to donate, you can go to my blog at spiritualawakeningprocess.com, and on the right hand side is a PayPal link. And any amount that you feel like donating is greatly appreciated. If you're not in a position to donate, don't worry about it. So, sexuality and the spiritual path. The spiritual path embraces everything. Spirituality embraces everything. Very simple. That's the beauty of the spiritual path, is the simplicity of it. It's not simplistic per se, so I think it's important to not reduce life into things that are too overly simplistic, in the sense of, it's just very reductionist. I don't know if that's the best example for it, but the sense that, it's right or wrong. I think that sort of simplicity or simplistic nature can come up in some of the ways we talk about spirituality. I'm really concerned about it, because I feel like we're getting into some soundbite spirituality that gets shared around a lot in the internet. So while we say things like be here now, being here now is a very simple, truthful thing. However, the now moment, what it may offer you, may be more complicated, right? But we start with that inherent simplicity, because that helps us clarify for ourselves how we're going to engage in situations, some of which could be very complicated. Some people, like refugees fleeing Syria, are actually in rather complicated situations around how are you going to be able to survive, where you're going to go, what are you going to eat, and things like that. But the be here now principle still applies. It's one of the ways we understand that spirituality is in everything. So anytime right or wrong starts to show up, that to me is where things are getting too simplistic, and it, generally speaking, is cutting out some aspect of the truth. And I think that's very true with a lot of what's happened to sexuality. That on a certain level, certain spiritual traditions have kind of made sexuality bad. And that's a real issue, because sexuality is inherently part of all of us. It's always been part of us. So it's not like a new technology. It's not like we're all trying to figure out what to do with like nanochemical machines. It was something I was reading online recently that they've recently developed, right? No, sexuality has been with us since the dawn of time. It's how we are here. Procreation is, the vehicle to maintaining the human species. So how it ever got put into the good-bad category is beyond me. And, creating this kind of simplistic notion that it's always one or the other, or there are only certain situations, gets us into a lot of trouble. When we come to our own hearts and we come into the present moment, we're always going to engage with situations far better, rather than trying to apply somebody else's belief, make it our own belief, and then apply it to all sorts of situations. So, for instance, a lot of people think sexuality is shameful. Then people learn to believe that, and then they apply it to all sorts of situations, including onto other people and their sexual expressions. And that causes more pain and suffering as people clash over these beliefs. So really dropping any sense of like good, bad around sexuality. Sexuality is a fact of human life. And it is a fact of human life that one of our fundamental driving forces inside us is the drive to procreate. Now, this has nothing to do with whether if you want kids or not. Okay, so that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the instinctual body and what it just does and what it wants to do. And in my opinion, and I welcome any other additional thoughts, but in my opinion, there are really three fundamentals that really drive human beings. That's the drive to survive. The flip side of that is the fear of death. The drive to avoid anything painful. And that can be definitely linked to the fear of death, but on its own, it has its own merit, because there's a lot of times where people avoid things that are just painful, like getting into shape, right? That's not going to threaten your ability to survive. But, people can have a lot of anxiety and resistance toward it because you're going to be, going through some uncomfortable things to get into shape, to start running in the way your body feels as it's getting healthy, right? So that's a second one, and the third, what we're basically talking about today, is that instinctual drive towards sex. So those are the three. If you can think of another that's major like that, let me know. But usually most of the other ones that I've thought of to date really build on those, like the fear of the unknown. If the unknown brought fun things, we wouldn't be scared of it, right? So usually the fear of the unknown is linked to a sense that it may bring us pain or death. And it sounds dramatic, but when you really peel off all these masks of the ego, you start to find these things sitting down there. And it's just an unavoidable fact, in my opinion. So as we accept that we have this sexual impulse, we also start to look at all the different levels and masks the ego's put on top of it. So some of the things that we think about are our ideas around what sex should look like, who it should be between, what it should feel like, how we should act in it, what our preferred partner should look like, act like, do, what we think about our own personal sexual practice, which I think is a very important piece, just as a part of honoring that aspect of us. And how much, our drive drives us, and how much we actually choose sexuality. And I think that's a really interesting aspect that we can really chew on for a while as we get into this discussion together, because on the one hand, we're not suppressing things, and there's this strong current in a lot of religious beliefs towards suppression and ignoring, that aspect of ourselves. And I always appreciated some distinctions some people in the Tantra community once made around making a distinction between celibacy and abstinence. And it's such a beautiful way to put it, because abstinence is like just negating your sexuality. It's like it's not there. And celibacy, we could think, and the way they created this term or recrafted it, think of it as you're having your own personal sexual practice, but not inviting anybody else into it. And I always thought that was kind of beautiful. And I want to offer that to you, that we can think of that sort of beautiful kind of celibacy. We're gonna take this term back, and we're gonna make it something new, as simply maintaining your own sexual energy, your own sexual space without inviting others in, versus abstinence being a negation on a lot of levels of your own sexuality. And then, of course, there's sexual activity, right? So that would be the third, where you invite people into your space, and they invite you into theirs. An invitation, I think, is an important aspect to think of with any sort of relationships and joining, because a lot of times, a lot of relationships are operating on assumption and aggression and all sorts of old unconscious things that are really coming out of that being controlled by a drive, right? The sexuality is driving people to get something fulfilled. It's a very different thing to come more towards your sexuality from the sense that I'm already fulfilled. And that this is something that I want to explore in myself. So putting aside the procreation side and just coming to like building a sexual practice for yourself, I think this is a really important thing to do, especially for those of you who are coming from a background where there's a lot of negation of your sexuality. To just allow it to have it in your own space. And for men, one of the beautiful things that we can do is we can learn to have multiple orgasms. It sounds like magic because our society is so sexually lost on a lot of levels, but it's not. You can read up on it online and find different resources, but it's basically this, that as you're getting ready to climax, you relax. I didn't mean to make that rhyme, but think of it that way. Just as you're about to climax, gentlemen, relax, and you'll get it, because ejaculation takes the sort of force and a kind of pushing out, where orgasm actually is a relaxing in. And then you can build that orgasmic energy. You can relax into it. You can orgasm multiple times. And you can start to see how your energy moves within you. It's a very energizing thing to do once you get a hang of it. It's a very beautiful thing. And it really does change your perspective on your own sexuality, what fulfillment is like, because you can really, really learn to open up very deeply. A lot of times shame gets in the way, other issues get in the way, especially, as I said, if you're coming from that abstinence path. And so that becomes an issue that you can work on through enjoying your own sexual space. It can feel kind of strange. You'll have like this one part that's feeling shameful and like this is bad, and you'll have this other part that's enjoying it, and you can witness both. And I really want to emphasize that witnessing part, that you drop into this deeper space inside, so just sort of watch, this interplay, this human experience, without giving anything any particular different weight or as one or being better than the other. But usually the shame starts to break down, and then there's just this enjoyment of the feeling that's being left over. Other ways to work with your energy is you'll start to notice where the energy rolls to in an orgasm. You'll start to notice where it gets stuck. So you can kind of breathe into those areas and start to explore, what is this energetic knot stuck in my chest or my back or wherever that energy rolls to. I mean, it's in no way etheric, right? It's a very physical experience when we orgasm. It's a very beautiful experience. And both men and women have access to this wonderful experience, and I really encourage you to embrace that aspect. Now, anytime desire starts really taking over, and we'll just keep it in your own personal space for the time being, that may be something you start to kind of breathe into and notice as well, rather than act out. And so there's this way where we start to kind of peel apart that drive and the desire that gets built on top of the drive for sex, away from choice. Because I really want to emphasize that when we're driven by something, whether it's fear of death, fear of pain, or the drive to have sex, we aren't making our decisions. Our decisions are being made for us. And this is very true of many levels of the ego self that gets built on top of these things. That we think we're making decisions, but we're not. We've already been told what to believe and what's possible and what's allowed. And so it's kind of like having this box, right? And this is all you can choose from. But that's not how life is. Life is infinite and vast and full of possibility. And so in this way, we see how limiting the ego is, and it can be very limiting in our sexual expression just within our own space, not even adding another party in yet. Obviously there's a really strong heterosexual current, to say the least, in Western society that says this is the right type of partnership to have, and that's not true. Spirituality embraces all forms of embrace between consenting adults of any gender and any gender preference. And this, once again, can be a challenge for some of you. I mean, some people get stuck into certain heterosexual practices because, starting to talk a little bit more about, having a partnership here, because of this fear of stepping outside this belief. Right. And so there can be a lot of denial of oneself, and that can be very unhealthy for somebody who's maybe naturally bisexual, or maybe even someone who's naturally asexual, or somebody, obviously a woman who prefers a woman, a man who prefers a man. Right. So there's a way we start getting to certain self-denial. Now, the deeper you drop into your own space, honestly, I don't get a sense that it really matters who you're with. Right. Because spirituality embraces everything, and it's the ego that needs to have identity based around gender and sexuality. But the pure self inside all of you doesn't. You may notice you have certain propensities, that become natural, but that usually comes after we've really dealt with a lot of issues to clear out the space to really ask, what is natural to me? What isn't? What is actual instinct? What is just social conditioning? What is natural to me? What is truthful to me? And this question applies to everything, because we've been taught how to think and believe around everything. And so we're dumping out a lot of ideas as we go. And that very much includes the spiritual path and sexuality. And I want to add that I think this is kind of urgent in a certain level. It's urgent to let sexuality be a healthy, normal thing, because that drives better conversations in society. It drives better awareness around everything from contraceptives to sexually transmitted diseases to just something simple like I was talking about with the multiple orgasms for men. Right? That's not really a commonly known thing. And for most people, you bring it up and guys' jaws drop on the floor and they're like, what are you talking about? It sounds some amazing technique or something, and it's not. Right? This is just how poor we are in our willingness to embrace sexuality, and always starts with our own. That we're afraid to embrace our own of what may be in there that may not be good by social standards. If you have a partner, that's great. If you don't have a partner, that's fine, right? Your sexuality is your own. And part of building this personal sexual practice, and I've talked a lot about this in the blog, is the more you can fulfill your needs on your own, that too, once again, it takes the desire and the drive issues out of it that's making you kind of hungry, let's say, sexually hungry, that drives you towards things that might not be truthful, might not even be healthy. So when you deal with that and you find yourself more and more deeply fulfilled in your own space, that's a great time to take a partner if you don't already have one. To invite somebody into your life. And I love to use the word invitation. When we invite somebody in, there's that offer, right? There's no force behind it. There's no obligation. And so much of relationships is coming with this sense of obligation and coercion and all sorts of really disgusting things that are all coming from the ego that's not happy and is trying to get itself fulfilled through another person. So when you build this inner practice and build your sexual practice into your own space, right? And you notice I don't use the term masturbation, and it's got so many nasty connotations around it as being a bad thing. It's not. It's just your own exploration. So being in that space of deeper fulfillment just makes it that much easier to choose a kind and loving partner that you can talk to, that you can explore with, you can set appropriate boundaries with. And in that space that you create with somebody, you can start to set understandings of, what is the space for? Obviously, we know procreation in the heterosexual world is one option, right? And it doesn't have to be the only option. Pleasure is also the very common option that people think about. But as I've already mentioned, there are ways that we can do spiritual work. That, what moves inside us is very powerful. And when we have another with us, they kind of mirror things or they draw out different things. So there is so much amazing healing that can come when you are both willing to be vulnerable, both be open. And so that can end up leading to less, outright sex, to just holding and talking, right? And I think that can't be underappreciated for the beauty of what that draws out in people's practice and the beauty of intimacy, because I think there's that part of that equation that people forget too, that at times sexuality becomes very goal-oriented for some people, right? And so the intimacy gets lost. And so just being in that space with setting these intentions, you can start to have newer and deeper levels of intimacy, depending on, regardless of what you're doing, with your genitalia. And if you are engaged in a sexual act, there are deeper levels of connection and union that become more open to you as you become more open, as your partner becomes more open. But a lot of honesty is needed there. A lot of communication is needed there. And so, as always, this is just another place where the spiritual work can arise. And when we embrace it, it just enriches the relationship. And I think that's just something I can't emphasize enough of how much richness there is when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and we can step into these spaces together with somebody else. There's a lot of profound and beautiful things can move in that space when we allow it. But there tend to be a lot of issues and beliefs that stand in the way. Sexual abuse is a huge issue. In my unofficial opinion, I would say 1 in 4 women has been sexually abused. I wouldn't even want to guess for the men, because I think that's even further underreported. The official stats is something like 1 in 33 have had a rape attempted on them. But, official statistics are always way underreported. So when two people are engaged in sexuality, some of those old emotions and some of those physical sensations are often triggered. And so if the space is not strong enough, if there's not an understanding to deal with it, then sex will only go so far, or it becomes just abhorrent to one of the partners, or they start acting out their abuse depending on what happened. But a lot of things can really get ugly really fast when we're in those vulnerable places if we don't practice working on ourselves and being open and sharing this with our partners that we do draw in. When we do draw in, it becomes transformative. The two people can really heal a lot of deep issues with each other. And that includes sexual abuse. And in so doing, of course, this person, as they heal through their sexual abuse, can really reclaim deeper levels of pleasure and enjoyment in themselves, as well as just generally feeling happy about themselves because they no longer have this huge inner pain stuck inside that they're carrying around with every day and every breath that they have. You know, some couples or even on your own, you can get into some of the spiritual paths that really do talk about taking that orgasmic energy to try and create a Kundalini Awakening. That's where the energy starts moving on its own. That's another way we can talk about a spiritual awakening. I usually don't get that specific because Kundalini tends to be very, very specific, and certain communities are very preferential on that term, and I don't need to be. They tend to talk about, you know, how the energy moves up and down the spine and the back. And so if that's something you want to engage with, right, I think, you know, you certainly want to be to some degree knowledgeable of the tools that you're using, because people don't think about how powerful sexual energy is, and they don't think about what it means to really awaken. A lot of people still have some very juvenile ideas about spiritual awakening, and it still kind of surprises me, some of the stuff that comes my way about it, that people think it would be with this or that. And, you know, it's just the aliveness moving. And any rock in the way of the river is going to get pressurized. It's going to get churned up and moved. Any stagnant mud is going to get flushed, you know. So all these issues can come out of this. But, you know, saying that, I think it's absolutely a wonderful practice if you want to use your sexuality to start to open and generate that Kundalini energy to get things moving inside, because it will move you towards greater truth and understanding about yourself. And in this day and age, I think that's just absolutely critical. I mean, we are living in a technological age of wonders and or horrors. What we can do with technology is vast, and it really depends on the user. It's like my hammer metaphors, that a hammer can build a house or you can hit somebody with it. It's dependent on the user. And our technology is advancing every day, and what we can do with it and the impact we can have with it is growing greater and greater on both levels of positive change and, you know, negative, you know, impacts that bring suffering and pain. So using your sexual energy to awaken the Kundalini, to bring yourself into greater consciousness, is wonderful. But be sure to have some people who know what they're doing with it, and to have kind of some support networks set up for yourself if you're really serious about it, because people don't understand what falling down into that inner well is and working through all your issues is like, and nor how long it can take. Anybody who has an awakening comes to me, I've been getting more and more serious and emphatic about saying, you are in this for the long haul. Clearing out issues is a multi-year process, depending on the issues and depending on you. So be sure you've got some way to support yourself and have a lot of time on your own. This isn't like, oh, I'm just going to, you know, work a 40-hour work week and, you know, then go have my... No, it doesn't work that way, like that. The spiritual awakening is your 24-hour work week. And you have to understand that and appreciate that. That's going to ask a lot of you. It also gives everything back to you in ways you couldn't possibly imagine. So take it seriously. Take your sexual energy seriously. On a more simple note, sexual energy is intensely creative. So it really offers you a wonderful doorway towards greater levels of creativity, whether you're, as I said, you don't have to be creating children. You can be creating a new business. You can be creating art. You can be writing. You can be, you know, just creating new relationships in your life. There's a certain aliveness that we open up to with our own sexuality, with orgasm. It's certainly a useful coping mechanism if used in moderation. Once again, it can be something that when we haven't really dealt with the drive, it can tip over into being something that's unhealthy because we're using it to avoid ourselves. So you can hear that I'm really talking about this in certain specific ways, not as a means towards avoidance, but a means towards greater self-knowledge. And a lot of tools can do that, where you can use meditation even as a way to avoid yourself rather than to engage more with life. Where meditation to me is a means of centering, of grounding, of coming back to yourself in any way that maybe you've gotten off balance, so you can better deal with the rest of life rather than to run from decisions and actions you need to make in an attempt to perfect yourself. Right? This happens, and this is a problem for some people. I really want to emphasize that pleasure is beautiful. Pleasure is fine. The more you work out, any sort of level of this drive that's just kind of making you feel like you have to have sex or have your own personal practice or any of that stuff, the more, you can just kind of open and relax into your own pleasure. The more there's a drive or desire, as I said, that's something to investigate. That's something we want to kind of know, like, what's going on here. Now, you can flip the coin. You can be like super promiscuous and engaging with sex with a lot of people because of these hidden pains, hidden traumas, or just, the drive for sex is just really kind of going crazy. And that's, coming back to a celibate path could be very useful where you're only having sex within your own space. And maybe even abstinence, right? But only in the sense of just kind of like a temporary purification of yourself to let the energies drop out of you that you've been engaging with and to let things calm down so you can come back again from a place of more mindfulness. The more you let go of issues, the less it really is that difficult to know what space you're coming from. But until we investigate, what I'm talking about can kind of seem opaque. Like we don't really understand what's happening inside us. So that's what makes it difficult to understand from where are we coming to sexuality. In the world of heterosexual sexuality, we are living in a contraceptive age that's pretty incredible. There are so many levels of contraceptives now available, and I encourage you to embrace that. A lot of other traditions can't talk about those things because they were written thousands of years ago when those things didn't exist. So how could it talk about it? I think that's always something we need to be mindful of, is sometimes the context of where a religion is coming out of, because that influences what the people who wrote the rules and guidelines were thinking about and having to deal with. I mean, there's probably a good argument that we kind of need to update some things because some of the new types of technology, including contraceptives, but all these other things that are going on. And what does it mean to be a kind person and a aware person when we're using all these different things? I mean, think about all the nasty things that get said on YouTube videos, right? It's like we don't have guidelines necessarily, like, what is proper etiquette and discussion on a YouTube channel. And this isn't the greatest example, but I just pointing out that there are things that haven't exist, and so that a lot of major religions couldn't address them. And I think we need to be aware of some of those limitations, and also continue to return to some of the basics of simply being kind to one another, right? That to me is where like religions are all very strong. Is pretty much all the major ones say, don't kill people and be kind, right? I just can't emphasize enough that sexuality is beautiful. It sounds funny to have to emphasize it, but when we live in such a sex-negative society, I do, and that sex-negative society often engenders these other groups called sex-positive, which is kind of silly if you think about it, because once again, this is a basic part of being a human being. And usually the things that we ignore end up acting out anyway, and it creates a lot of sexual shadows. Sexual shadow to me really is where sex and pain get intermixed together. There's a lot of shame around it, and we're hurting ourselves in one way or the other, whatever way that may be, rather than really enjoying and pleasuring ourselves and being with another. The more open and clear we are, the less we want to inflict pain on anybody, including ourselves or a loved partner. But the more we deny these things and the more shame we feel wrapped around these things, the more there's this tendency that we already feel bad and like we should be punished or hurt or emasculated or whatever, right? So there's a lot of stuff like that grows out of this repressive thinking, out of this sex negative thinking. And so, I mean, really, before you even deal with your sexuality and build a sexual practice, you're dealing with everything up here, everything above the neck before you ever get below the waist. The stuff below the waist is actually relatively simple and for the most part harmless, especially in your own practice. There's nothing bad that's going to happen out of you enjoying your own space. With a little bit of awareness and kindness, you can set up a safe space with you and another partner, and it's not a big deal. These things just really aren't that big of a deal. So as you're kind of thinking through some of these initial comments I'm sharing, feel free to type any questions you may have in the chat pod. Once again, I encourage you to direct them all to me, not necessarily chatting back and forth with each other. It's just too easy for things to get lost. It's a small space. But I'm just going to keep emphasizing that your sexuality is beautiful. You have every right to enjoy it, and it's nobody else's business what you do in your own sexual space. And it also can be very much a part of your spiritual practice of getting to know yourself and to work through different issues and definitely work your way down to that fundamental sex drive thing. Because, to me, a lot of the reason people get into relationships, it's not the only one, but it's a big one, is that sort of drive towards procreation, especially obviously in heterosexual couples. That's the big drive. And it doesn't mean the people actually want to have children. See, and it sounds really funny to say that, but a lot of times, just all the social pressure and the sexual drive pushes people towards this, and then they end up finding out that they don't really want to be a mom or a dad. Every now and then you have people on the other side, and that's usually the side I think people like to focus on, is like the woman who never thought she wanted to have kids and she had kids and she completely fell in love. That's fine, but it's much better to know yourself first before ending up in that situation and rolling the dice. Well, woohoo, I won, I do want to have kids. Because there are more than a few situations where parents don't. And they feel forced to for one reason or another. And that's some of the interesting conversations that occasionally crop up in some of the sessions that I have. And I'll be talking to somebody who didn't want to be a mom or a dad. Right? And of course, I'm making space for that because that's okay for them to feel that way. But now they're in that position. And so how do you be mindful in that position? And this is one of the things that happens to us if we don't deal with our issues. And our issues are deciding for us how to interact. The social issues and beliefs that we should be in a relationship, that we should have kids, and that biological drive that says that we should do that. And then we land in that space. We're like, wait, this isn't true to me. There are many other situations where a different drive gets us into similar situations where, like, how did I get here? This isn't what I really want. And usually when we say that, we don't really know what we really want. So take a couple deep breaths in, and you're just sitting. And maybe some of the things that I've said has ignited some issues inside you, so I encourage you to breathe into them, to start to notice them. Because unfortunately, because we live in what I'm going to continue calling a sex-negative culture, we get taught a lot of things. And when somebody starts speaking and going opposite to the prevailing thinking, that causes triggers to come up. And so this is an opportunity to breathe into those triggers so you can find out what you actually believe rather than what was programmed into you. So even now, this little conversation can be a part of your sexual practice, just because, as I said, we're working on getting the head right, to simply accept a natural aspect of yourself. That's it. That's all we're talking about, really. Hi, Zoe. Would you have any advice for anyone who feels ready to explore sexuality with others? Sure. I always say start slowly. Continue with your own practice, because the more fulfilled you are in your own practice, the more you know yourself in your own practice, the more you're going to come from a place of curiosity. And that's very different than that drive to have a partner. Like, the more kind of hot and passionate, gotta have it, the more you kind of want to question that. Where is this really coming from? Because that's when we start to think this is more of that old genetic instinctual desire, is just forcing us into a situation, rather than us coming through a place of curiosity and choice. In going slowly, you get time to ask questions of each other, to share what's going to work for you, what doesn't work for you, to share where you're open to explore, right? Those aspects are really, really important conversations to build up to, where like when we're really driven, once again, that drive will make us have these one night stands, or, these short couple of one-nighters all in a row or whatever. So that's the sense you're still not making your decision. We often think we're making our decision, but later on we realize we weren't. It can get us in situations that we later regret. So that slowness allows you to build a rapport. And like I said, if you're in any way interested in deeper inner work, which may come anyway, okay, so you get two people together or more, it doesn't really matter, like it's all embraced. You're offering more and more mirrors to each other. And more issues kind of bounce back faster and faster the closer the mirrors are together. And so having that clear space to understand what you want out of your sexual experiences. This is just going to be pleasure. Do we expect that some issues may come up, or do we want this to be more about igniting our kundalinis together? Right? There are a lot of different options you can do and you can look into. And then, obviously talking about contraception and what if, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, what if somebody gets pregnant, and talking about STDs and all these conversations that sound mundane and not a whole lot of fun. But my experiences as you talk about that then actually opens up the space for fun. You understand where you are with each other, and it's a lot easier to just dive in and let yourself be free as you both want to. So that would be kind of my initial reply to that. So let me know if there's a specific avenue you're more interested in the sense like, having a shared spiritual practice through sexuality, if you're just talking about just generally enjoying that space. But thank you for being vulnerable and offering. Hi, John. John says, there's so much garbage with many religious marriages as well. Yeah, that's putting it mildly, John. There's so much garbage with many religious marriages as well, wherein the vows themselves say that by getting into marriage, they are promising to have a certain number of children, so many conditions. Well, I hadn't heard that you have to have a certain number of children and certain vows, but yeah, I think that's really problematic because usually people haven't really investigated the children issue particularly well. That's just such a big thing to really discuss, because anytime a man and a woman, right, once again, the heterosexual sex is not the only way to enjoy life. I just can't emphasize that enough, that it can be any particular way. But in the heterosexual culture, you have to talk about that possibility, right? That's just something that can happen. That's what men and women are made to do, and hence why the instinctual drive is there. So knowing yourself, knowing your own conditions on sex and peeling that stuff away is just so, so important. And then, if you were both really conscious and aware, you could potentially do that if it both felt true to you to say, hey, we want to have this number of children. And that's not a bad amount of clarity to have. And John says Catholicism is at least 2. I didn't know that. Thanks for letting me know. And while I don't want to appear to be anti-religion in any sort of way, I think, once again, I just want to emphasize that those religions, the major religions, have grown up out of a certain period of time that needed law and order. And that's a lot of what religion does, is gives order to a time and a place where there was none, as well as, guidance towards what the spiritual life should look like. So I feel like when you understand it like that, it once again moves you more towards, what's the essence that most religions are talking about, and focusing on that, because with some of these huge books, you could focus on anything and, kind of come to very different decisions about what's right or wrong, depending on what part of the Bible or other books you focused on. But so come back to the basics. Be kind, don't kill people. Also, we live in a world that's now 7 billion people. And we have to respect that, right? This isn't a world where there's less than 1 million. From John, to clarify, it's not that they necessarily have to decide before the vow is made. It's simply they are required by dogma to have multiple children. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. And so, I mean, I definitely think, on the topic of like having sex to bring children into the world, there's a way that we can be extremely mindful in that. That can be very much an important part of our spiritual paths. I don't know how many people have the opportunity, but if you are in a committed relationship and you are thinking about having kids, then really consider about, having kind of this ritual of letting go of couplehood to move towards parenthood. I don't know how much of a ritual anybody ever really gives themselves to do that, because you are giving up a certain way of relating to your partner if you're moving towards that space, and your life is going to be forever changed because you have children. So making that part of kind of your own spiritual ritual for each other as you kind of talk through, what does this mean, as well as how many kids do we want to have? I think it's important as you kind of make space to really intentionally make space for a beautiful being that you're going to raise together, or several beings that you're going to raise together. I know some people get into talking about, what do you have to do to bring a conscious child into this world, but I generally just say, be conscious yourself, do your own inner work, because your children are just going to learn so much from you based on how you interact. And that includes sexuality. So for those who want to have children, the more conscious and kind you are with your own sexuality and your partner is with his or her, the more you can just naturally kind of show that and exude that towards your kids and how you are together. And kids are very perceptive. They can sense the energy of how their parents feel about different areas of themselves better than they can ever put into words. And then, of course, as kids come of age of understanding their sexuality, then you can talk about some of the very same things I'm talking about tonight to you. That you can talk about embracing their sexuality through a place of kindness, of appreciating the space of celibacy, of learning multiple orgasms for men, of learning to understand their sex drive, but not to be lost in it. All those different things, rather than just repress it, ignore it, or here's a pack of condoms and good luck. Thanks for your questions and comments thus far. Hi, Zoe. Thank you, Jim. I've been practicing mindfulness and being present in the moment. However, I have had trouble in a previous relationship of focusing on feeling, and it hindered the experience. Well, I think, that's why, having, a very open and communicative relationship is important, because the more intimate things become, the more challenging that can become for us at different times until we get used to it. So, whenever there's like trouble, if we're talking about, having sex with a partner and there's something that's coming up that's troubling you, or there's a issue with a feeling, that's a time to actually talk about it, right? And so learning to talk about sexuality, right, especially right in the middle of it, it can be really, really important, to talk to your partner, oh, this is coming up for me. And then your partner can, as you learn together, can say, oh, well, what is that? And just holding each other as you kind of talk through it is incredibly powerful. A lot of times when something troublesome comes up in sex, people just stop and say, okay, forget it, right? Well, when something troubling comes up, to me, part of this is like, no, this is the time to say, yes, okay, what's going on? And just being together and start to focus in on what's come up. Because while we all want it to always be pleasurable all the time, that's just not how life is, much less sexuality. So we start to say, okay, so we thought we were going towards a pleasure connection, but it seems like something else needs attention first. So we're going to go towards that. And oftentimes it really doesn't take that much to resolve it. And sometimes it's more intimate than anything you were going to be doing physically. And sometimes as you work through that, then the intimacy and the physicality of it go even deeper, because there's no longer this thing that's hindering. So I just really want you to embrace whatever comes in that space. And as I said, when you have a partner who can communicate with you and you're willing to communicate back, a lot of beautiful things can happen beyond just having pleasure. You can discover whole new worlds within yourself and with the partner. Let me know if that's helpful, Zoe. What other questions do people have in our last 15 minutes or so together? I do think it is really cool. Like the more aware you become of your sexual energy, when you orgasm, how you can learn to breathe into it, how you can move it through your body. It's really powerful stuff. This creative energy, all the ways it flows through you. As I said, it doesn't just make children. It can be a creative force for many, many different things. And then additionally, you get all the whatever neurotransmitters and hormones you release that make us all feel so good inside, right? That come with orgasm. So it's just a super beautiful space. Doesn't have to be anything to be ashamed of. You're welcome, Zoe. I'm glad it helped. And I think there's something very grounding too. So in the space of a spiritual awakening, it can be really, 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 really turbulent. And there's something about when we come to orgasm in our own energy, it can be very, very grounding to really drop us in. Hi, Natasha. Sometimes we get confused about orgasm. Does it disperse your energy? It has made me feel bad about sometimes. Well, I don't know. You'd have to send me something from somebody saying why that would disperse energy for women, Natasha. So that's typically a male concern because men are designed to send stuff away, right, as part of conception. But when you orgasm as a man without ejaculating, that energy stays inside. And that's definitely been my experience. And so it actually can come really, really amp me up. I don't have my energy dispersed at all by that. And for women, like, I've never really heard it so much that you're sending energy away when you orgasm. So I've heard of that issue in general, as I said, just for men. But, even if you're having ejaculatory orgasms as a guy, you'd probably have to be having a lot of them to really, really start to impact your energy. It does kind of disperse a little bit, but I think that can be a little superstitious, and so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Although it's something we could discuss more if you wanted to, Natasha. If you find some article that really explains that, I think the bigger issue really is around the shaming of oneself or the feeling bad for your own sexual pleasure, right? That to me is the bigger issue. And as I said, it typically is a men thing that people talk about it, but explore it in your own space. You can let me know if you feel like your energy is being dispersed. That to me, like the more you pay attention to yourself, it kind of becomes obvious. Am I dispersing energy somehow, or is it moving through? And you can always, breathe into it and just visualize it's coming up your back and down your front, kind of like a cycle when the energy comes through. And that's one of the ways that after orgasming, that we can continue to move it. Thanks for the comment. What else is on people's minds? And in general, I'm always concerned anytime anybody is making anyone feel bad about sex in any any regard. I mean, the far other side of this, is like sexaholism or something like that, where like you're just so driven and you're constantly lost to try and regain that feeling, right? That's a real issue, right? And that's something that needs to be addressed and treated. But it's usually going to be sitting on top of a bunch of other core issues too, that people are trying to cover up with good feelings. And at which point that type of addiction is like any other kind of addiction, where we're trying to get some sort of different chemical feeling going on inside us so that we don't feel something else. Hi, Laura. What about if women delay orgasm intentionally by working with Tantra, Tao practices? That way one can send your energy to wherever is needed and moving it around your body. What do you mean by delay orgasm? I'm not really familiar with that idea. Because to me, when you have an orgasm, then the energy is moving and you can move it wherever you want. And certainly as you breathe and, relax and focus on things, you can build up energy. And then you can move that wherever you want without orgasming. But then to me, that would be a little bit different. So I'm curious to hear what you say. Hi, Jonathan. The issue for me is that I feel bad when I think of having sex with a woman without necessarily being in love with her. There's a lot of shame around that. Well, I think, there's a couple of things around that, because that to me sounds like there is this kind of sexual drive, right, that I was talking about, that instinctual push and then the social push that's saying that you should have sex. So I think that's where we want to first look at the motivation, what's hiding underneath it, In general, I encourage you from the spiritual teaching space that our practice on the spiritual path is to love everything, to be in love with all of life as it is. And love, very simply, is that sense of accepting everything exactly as is. So really dropping into that profound space of love, that to me is actually probably even more important. The more you can do that before stepping into partnership, the better. It doesn't preclude having a partner and having fun with them. But obviously, if there's already some shame going on here, I feel like there are other deeper motivations that you're kind of feeling that need to be addressed. And one of the best ways to address any issue is to drop into deeper states of love with yourself, to just accept yourself as you are and start to notice what's going on, what's driving me. Where is this coming from? Is this I have to prove I'm a man thing? Is this just my own sexuality just wanting to be expressed? If that's it, if it's just your sexuality wanting to be expressed, practice the multiple orgasms thing I was talking about. See how deeply fulfilled you can get into that space. And then, go see about having a partner. So those are some ways that you can address the shame and the deeper motivations, Jonathan. Thanks for the comment and question. And I really do appreciate everybody who's commenting, questioning tonight, because it can be such a vulnerable thing to discuss. And as I said, our society hasn't been very good about encouraging healthy conversations around these things. For men in particular, there's such this culture of we have to go out and have sex with as many women, right? It's very heterosexually driven, very homophobic, and it's just nuts, And so these types of things really screw up a lot of things for men and women. Once again, speaking in the heterosexual world, I'm sure it has other applications because it's not natural. It's we don't have to behave that way. And there's a lot of things around love that I feel like men really, really don't understand. And they're just completely driven by the sexual drive that's going on inside, as well as the need to prove that they're a man. See, women don't ever have sex with a man to prove they're a woman. Men have sex with women to prove they're men. This is a huge issue for men. And it's an issue that men absolutely have to address because it just makes everything so toxic, right? It turns women into objects, and it really turns the man into an object too, right? Who's constantly having to prove himself. And sex is just one of many ways that men get taught they have to prove themselves. So there's just something more food for thought for all the men who are listening today to think about, how are you coming to sex, And if it's about proving to yourself that you're a man, I want to offer this. You already are a man. You don't have to prove it. So see, Laura got back to me. Haha, it's hard to explain. Talking about getting to the point where you're about to orgasm, you feel your orgasmic energy, but by breathing and other things, you can slow it down. Yeah, that's beautiful. Hey, if it works for you, Laura, I have no problem with that. If they call that delaying orgasm, sure. I mean, as I said, I was speaking more from definitely the man's side of things, of how we experience it, because when we get to that point of orgasm, we relax, but you definitely have the orgasm. And that's a very distinctive feeling. And then we can move the energy around. So thanks for sharing. Any of the women who are reading that, that's something to consider in how you explore yourselves. And you can thank Laura for that. And you're welcome, Jonathan. Let's see, maybe one last question before we wrap up. And hopefully in all this, you have gotten some interesting insights into sexuality and some ways that you can explore yourself in a very sex positive, healthy and beneficial way. Hopefully it gives you some ideas around how the spiritual path and sexuality are inherently intertwined, because sex has always been with us. Spirituality is always here. For those who want to donate, as I said, you can go to spiritualawakeningprocess.com, and then there's a PayPal button on the right. But don't feel obligated. It's just an option I put out there, and I do thank everybody who has donated to me, because you're the reason I get to do this stuff for free and do it full time. So thank you. So any last thoughts, questions? Seems like we're kind of wrapping up. I think we had a really good discussion, good range of questions, and I appreciate them. Okay. Well, it sounds like everybody is satisfied for tonight, so I leave it to you. Enjoy exploring your sexuality. I'll be back in 2 weeks at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, and I'll be talking about the bliss of being nobody. Have a great day, night, evening, wherever you are, or morning. Take care.